It's still Wednesday.
Hi, it's Jerry Roberts back with another edition of Newsmakers Journal of the Plague Year. It is Wednesday, December 16th, and we are delighted to have with us today Deborah Schwartz, president of the Santa Barbara City Planning Commission. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
It's great to be on your show, Jerry. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Well, let's get right to it. So several of my colleagues said in a recent show that you are definitely running for mayor. You're in. So I figured I better ask you before I let them go on with that again. Are you running for mayor? Yes or no?
Yes, I am, Jerry. And you're the first one to officially hear it in the media. And if I could just give you a little background as to how I came to this really difficult decision.
Please.
Because I certainly didn't start the year out with any intention to run for office, but we've had such extraordinary times, difficult times, with lives and livelihoods on the line. And what happened, Jerry, and yes, I'm in my 11th year as a planning commissioner, and I'm chair this year. Probably partway through the summer, I started to receive calls from our community members, all walks of life, expressing not only concern and frustration, but also even anger, which really kind of jolted me and prompted me to think about where we're going, where the kind of management, the kind of leadership that we need in our city. And many of these community members were asking me to consider running, which is no small task. For a mayorship or any other role, but we're really at a point where people are saying, can we do better? Must we do better? And I firmly believe that we need a course correction. And I think there are many members of the community that believe we need a course correction in leadership. Very recently, Jerry, I made a very difficult decision to go ahead and run, starting to build a team for a launch shortly. And you and others will hear much more about that. I deeply care about our community. As you know, I grew up here. My family was deeply involved in public service and my father at UCSB. And again, with 11 years in community service on the Planning Commission, I've seen a lot, been involved a lot. I'm a co-author of our 20-year general plan.
Right.
Along with housing policy, which is very important during our continued housing crisis. So with that, I'm ready to go.
All right. Well, listen, I appreciate you breaking the news here. Plenty of free parking on Newsmakers. We appreciate people making news. Well, let's break it down a little bit. So you mentioned the extraordinary conditions, obviously, that we're all living through. We sort of have the pandemic, so we have the public health piece, obviously the economic collapse that we've witnessed, and the ongoing difficulty with businesses to respond to the state. And then, of course, the protests over racism that we've seen. And you kind of layer that all on top of these chronic problems that we've had, whether it's building affordable housing or homelessness, or the balance between how we preserve what we have and how we go forward. So what is your, first of all, what's your assessment of how City Hall and the mayor specifically have done in responding to those three crises that came at us, admittedly, very fast and unexpectedly?
Right, Jerry. Well, certainly there's lots that we couldn't have anticipated. A global pandemic, which brought on this public health crisis, which furthered our economic frailty, shall we say. But really, there's been a buildup, as you know, Jerry, to an economic slide, a retail slide on State Street and elsewhere. And this was pre-pandemic. Just in the last 2 years, we've had consultant reports. We, the public, paid for consultant reports telling us we have too much commercial square footage that is unused. It's not healthy for the city. And there are various issues around that, which I can talk to you about another time. But we also don't have, even though we've now hired an economic development manager, started in March, we don't have a short-term or long-term economic development plan. We don't have a strategic homeless plan. This is not new for the city. I know you also wanted to talk about homelessness. I don't have to get into it all right now if you want. But without a strategic homeless plan, we're simply on a reactive basis providing funding for very deserving nonprofits in our community who are doing wonderful work. But as you have seen the numbers just this year, the city of Santa Barbara has the most number of unsheltered neighbors in our city compared to every other city in the county or the unincorporated county. And we far and away even exceed Santa Maria, who has a slightly larger population than the city of Santa Barbara. So without these strategic plans, we're kind of afloat. It's management by reaction, and that's not good for any of us. And both the residents and business community are really calling again for more and a course correction.
So if I hear what you're saying, you would be more proactive and more strategic, less reactive and less tactical in responding to both the immediate economic plans or problems we have, as well as the long term. What would that look like as a practical matter? Because as you know, the charter fairly limits the powers of the mayor, which are largely those of persuasion, collaboration, so on the bullet pulpit. So how would a Deborah Schwartz mayorality look in that context to address the issues in the way you just stated?
Well, you're right, Jerry. There's no extraordinary powers given to our mayor in our city charter, but the mayor's role is different than the other 6 council members. And it's critical for the mayor to forge relationships with the colleagues, that's the council members, to build consensus, respect, in order to come together on policies that help move the city forward for a sustainable future. First of all, to get us out of the pandemic in some sort of a balanced, healthy way, but also into the future. And from what I'm hearing, and I watch the council hearings myself, we don't see that type of collegiality and cohesion and working together as a team. This is something I've really invested myself in, Jerry, this year on the Planning Commission as chair. That the 7 of us are very different, our backgrounds, even our personalities, but we do come together to do the public's work, to do the public good. And that's what's critical for the mayor and the council members. And it has to start with the mayor leading in building those relationships, first and foremost. And then, of course, yes, kind of influence management, which they say from management 101, but it's true. And so we don't see that out of the current mayor's seat. And it's critical. And then, of course, proper direction to senior staff to lead the city in a particular direction that's outward facing, not inward facing. And that means the public is the customer. Okay. And sometimes we forget that. We turn in on ourselves and are too focused on what's going on inside City Hall, as opposed to looking out to say, who are we serving? Who's the customer? Like in a business, we're not really running the city as a business in that way, and we need to.
To what extent do you feel, and I agree with your analysis of the way that the council operates. I don't think it's collegiality would be the first word that would come to mind in describing it. But to what extent do you think that dynamic is driven by district elections? Is that something that people are looking too much just to their individual areas and their own districts, and therefore have less of a reason to collaborate? Or is it because they're not really being led in a direction that would be more cooperative?
It could be some of both. I think you have a good point, and I think you and I have talked a bit about the pros and cons of district elections in a small city like ours. I think we've seen some of the benefits where very localized issues by neighborhoods or by district are closely attended to and represented well, and championed by the district elected council members. At the same time, we need to remind one another, again, even with Planning Commission, that we're here to all work together on the city's behalf. That means everyone in the city. That means every neighborhood, all residents, all walks of life, businesses in all of our neighborhoods. And that, I think there's a requirement for civility and mutual respect that has to be the underpinning of these relationships, because if we don't start there, where is there the incentive for people to want to work collaboratively together, collegially? And here again, I'm really proud that we've been doing that on the Planning Commission. I hope it's apparent to you and the public at large. We've received really positive feedback about that. But those are the lessons learned of sort of each one of us taking a leadership role in our responsibility to the community and the public in working productively through our differences together for the well-being of community. And that is an important leadership obligation of the mayors. And the community's telling me we just don't see that at this time.
So when you say that City Hall or the City Council at least is too much inward looking rather than outward looking, so are you saying that the current mayor has allowed both personal and political differences to come between that ability to bring everybody together in a common vision?
Well, there's some of that, but let me also be clear. I'm really talking about city staff for the most part, that city staff has, and this is not, I'm not sharing with you anything that isn't already public. It came out of 2 consultant reports, both last year and this year, that there isn't a sense of obligation to engage with the public, to listen to the public, and then to be responsive to the public in order to further community well-being. And there's ultimately the responsibility of the electeds, as you know, to direct staff, to guide them and direct them to fulfill this obligation to the community. Is there a little bit of that going on between council and mayor? I think so. But it's hard to all be rowing in the same direction if there isn't an incentive to do that. And sometimes, especially during a pandemic where we're working remotely, we have to go above and beyond, kind of tapping our best selves to work respectfully and productively together. And I think that's a big missing ingredient in serving our city well.
All right, well, you obviously, when you talk about city staff, what we're really talking about is the community development department. And, those consultant reports that you referenced made very clear that it has an adversarial stance against business interest developers as well as homeowners who, are trying to get something done. How would you change that? Obviously, the longtime director, George Buell, has resigned. We're conducting a search for that. But, below that, there's a lot of entrenched bureaucracy that can, I think, be pointed to in terms of the problems that the consultants raise. So what needs to change there? How would you go about making changes, and what would you want to see come out of them?
Well, I think, first of all, I respect interim community development director Rebecca Bjork. And I know she is just interim, but I think that she's moving a process forward effectively. I would like to see that accelerated. And this ties into the subcommittee that Alejandra Gutierrez, Eric Friedman, and Mike Jordan are on. I think we need to pick up the pace in making the long overdue process changes. Some of this is organizational culture. Let's just call it what it is. That needs an overhaul, and I know our city administrator knows that. He's received that message loud and clear. I don't think that it's happening fast enough. And I'm hearing this from the community, that kind of long-standing practices within community development are not changing. So we have some wonderful employees, and yet I think many of them are confined or stuck in a culture that is not outward customer service oriented. And so it's imperative to change that.
Yeah. I mean, what do you trace that to? Is it just historically that, because Santa Barbara was a very slow growth, slow development place, that has become entrenched? I mean, to what do you ascribe the culture? How did the culture come about?
I think some of that is the case, although we've had different chapters from different leaders of community development and planning over many years. You've known some of the past directors, and they bring their own values. They put their own stamp on the department. That's what a leader does, and so they have to set expectations, and then performance has to be evaluated against that. And with government, it means serving the people. It means serving the community, the customer, which means when we get feedback from the community that we're serving them effectively, we need to adjust. You could say it's similar to a private sector business where if we're not serving the customer, whether it's a restaurant on State Street or it's retail, if we're not serving customers and the customers don't want to do business with us, that should be a red flag that we need to change our business practices. And that's what is long overdue in the city. Some of it is underway, but I think it needs to be accelerated along with these other critical plans that are not in place. Again, we hired a new first-time economic development manager back in March, and we'll have not seen a short or long-term economic development plan through COVID and beyond, along these other critical plans. So we need to have a plan in place, and then we need to be nimble and adjust. And we're all not as nimble as we need to be, which I can talk to you about, perhaps in another session. We have the tools to do it. We're not using the tools.
All right, let me ask you this. So what is your vision for this city? Say, so the elections in 2021, say you won and then you won a second term. So basically you would have almost an entire decade to lead the city towards a particular vision. What would that look like? What would be in 2030 the economic foundation of the city? What would our tax base look like? Obviously, we're moving from retail tourism to something, but it's not clear what that is yet. And also, this is a question I'm just always curious about. What do you think the population of Santa Barbara should be? We're about 90,000. We talk a lot about more housing. Do we need to grow in terms of the number of people are here, or what? Just what's your overall vision in those areas?
Well, I'll start with population because we are a slow growth city, and we always have been, or at least, going back, let's say, to several decades, maybe 1% a year. We're about 91,000 now. So our population, unlike suburban sprawl, that's not going to happen here. The question for us is how to continue to sensitively and appropriately build housing. Some of it is tearing down the old and building new. It's adaptive reuse, so that we can house at more affordable rates, not discount rates, because all housing in Santa Barbara is expensive, as you know, Jerry, and that's a sacrifice we all make to live here. But to sensitively and strategically build housing, which means we have to help permit the housing. So we go back to our processes and practices, but also something that we've long overlooked, and I've talked to many successful business owners on the South Coast about this. We've not cultivated a kind of Santa Barbara's open for business value set that both encourages clean businesses to move here, high-tech businesses, stay and grow here. I spoke with the founder owner of a number of companies who have chosen to move outside of the city of Santa Barbara as they grew. They wanted to stay here. And they pay their employees well, so those employees could contribute to our economy, have families, put down roots, and so forth. But we're not reaching out to them. It's as though we don't care if they leave. We don't care if we don't have the tax base, the young families staying here, participating in our community. And that's a long-standing practice in our community. Yardi Systems is a perfect example that started in Santa Barbara, grew to a number of buildings, leased buildings, and then said, we're on a fast path to growth, and no one at City Hall seems to care if we stay here. So let's look to Goleta, plenty of land, and the fast upward trajectory of Yardi, very successful company. That's not a one-off story. So what are we willing to do to have appropriate growth, clean business growth, additional housing? And it needs to be sensitively done, but we need a plan and a will, the political will, to allow this to be done sensitively, or we're going to get more pressure from the state of California. You know this from the state legislature.
Right. Well, let's
And
go. Let me just ask you about that, because as I read the numbers, Santa Barbara, the city of Santa Barbara is supposed to permit 3,000, almost 3,100 new units by 2023. And
right.
In the last couple of years, we've done maybe 1,000, and 800 of those are above moderate. So that's a big task. And there have been steps taken. Obviously, the inclusionary housing changes that have been talked about.
Right.
The ADUs have helped with that, but there needs to be, it seems to me, a much more dramatic and radical push on that. What does that look like under your mayoralty?
You're so correct, Jared. We can't continue on the one multi-unit housing policy we have, which is going through changes. That's the AUD program, is really on life support. Let's just call it what it is. It's not generating housing. And it's been on a downward slide and then flatlined over the last 3 to 4 years. So there's no way for us to meet our current housing requirements that we told the state of California. We have the land, we have the policies, and then we didn't produce. Now, we don't produce the actual housing, we don't build it. But to the extent that we have housing applications coming through the city that languish, and I am being very direct with you and saying languish in the community development department, is not good for anyone. It's not just about that department. It's what are we doing or not doing together to satisfactorily address a housing crisis that's just going to continue to get worse as our housing stock deteriorates. So we need to look ourselves in the mirror and say, what must we do? And what will it take to change our internal processes and practices? Because that pressure from the state, you may know this, Jerry, is going to go up with the next, what's called RENA cycle, the regional needs housing allocation. So just because we're not making the number now, doesn't mean we're going to get any relief from the state. In fact, we're going to get more pressure. What the consequences are from that pressure, we could talk about maybe in another session, because there are consequences. But the real consequences for us as a community are that we have people overcrowded in housing. We have deteriorating substandard housing, not enough housing being built for the missing middle, that's called the middle class. And if we attract more business, if we allow businesses to expand, these what I'm going to call clean energy businesses, high tech, those employees, younger employees, typically want to live and work and play in Santa Barbara. We don't want to commute from Goleta to play here. So we need to do all of this, but it also requires that we move faster in using adaptive management tools, which I can talk to you about another time, which means we can get through policy changes more quickly. We have the written tools to do it. We're not using the tools in the toolkit.
What about the tool of raising height limits? Do you think that's something we should do? I know there's a couple projects that have gone from 48, 48, something like that, but some people, think we need to go to 60 feet. Where do you come down on that?
Well, it's a sensitive topic in our city because, well, this, because the aesthetics are so key to our city. The beauty of our city is the hallmark of our city. So how do we do this sensitively and strategically? Not say no, but find ways forward to a yes that on balance allows for some additional height In some areas, we probably have to start looking at this in a more micro way, because there are more sensitive areas that are views up to the mountains, to the ocean, on the north side of the street, the south side. So there isn't a one size fits all. But if we don't start to move in this direction, to find common ground, to find a good balance, guaranteed the state legislature is going to strip us of zoning and development jurisdiction, flexibility very soon. They're still headed in that direction. So I say, and I say to my colleagues, both on council as well as to staff, we are better off if we take up the responsibility and get out in front of this and figure it out ourselves for a city, not have to push it up to Sacramento to tell us what to do.
And that would also, I assume, include greater density. And we're really looking at, are we not downtown? I mean, that's what the core of the solution, or that's where the core of the solution is to be found. What are we going to do about all these restaurants and retailers that are just, hanging on now on the edge? What are your thoughts on that?
Jerry, it is so painful. I probably had 2 lunch meetings downtown a week before we closed. Yeah, I mean, don't we all miss that? And I probably had too many lunch meetings downtown, too much eating out. But I love our restaurants, as we all do. And I've talked to many of our small restaurant owners lately. They are begging us to find solutions both at the state level, proper enforcement in public of face coverings, which we're still seeing is not happening, unfortunately. But here's the thing, Jerry, without, again, a plan to help us through the pandemic and beyond, we're reacting to the public health crisis, which is putting us in an economic free fall. I am deeply concerned with where our city's going financially without the transient occupancy tax. You and I were going to talk about that. We have about a 17.5% drop this last month over last year this time. We have a drop in sales tax. It's about 7%, but it's really that bed tax. We've been heavily relying on tourism at our hotels and bed and breakfasts to bolster our general fund. And so you asked about where's our future? We need to rebalance the economics of our city. And we come back to bringing business here. That's clean business, high-tech business. They pay well. They bring younger, educated people in. They allow people to start families, contribute to the economy. Now we also need to talk about our unsheltered neighbors.
Yeah.
This is a topic downtown. You and I also wanted to talk about this. And without a strategic homeless plan, and by the way, compare that, Jerry, to our neighbor to the north, a younger city, City of Goleta, recently launching a community engagement, community feedback forum to start build their own strategic homeless plan. Here we are, a much older city, and with most of our unsheltered neighbors in the county, in our city, over 900 compared to over 300 in Santa Maria.
Well, and I imagine that number is going to grow given the pandemic and what you.
I think so. It's tragic. It creates instability and lack of safety, both for those who are unsheltered and for the rest of us interacting with the chronically homeless, both on State Street and elsewhere. And this needs to be front and center, Jerry.
Yeah. And what's the core of the solution there? Is it building housing again? Is it building shelters, or is it putting more money into social services, addiction, alcoholism, people with mental illnesses? What's the balance there?
Yeah, well, it's hard to balance, right? And in talking to many of the professionals in this field, they're all telling me nothing is off the table. It's got to be sort of a big puzzle, all the puzzle pieces put together. It's not just housing. It's not just the services. It's all of it. But we can't do that without our own strategic homeless plan that is in cooperation with and collaboration with our sister cities, with the county, and even the state of California. But how can we do that without our own plan, figuring out what our role is and how to integrate with the nonprofits and the other governmental agencies? So we don't have a roadmap, Jerry, and this is what's critical. It's festered for quite some time. I'm very concerned about what I'm seeing in the downtown area. I have seen some of our regular unsheltered neighbors carrying even more of their possessions with them, taking up more space in our public right of way. And this just isn't healthy for them or our community. It's unsafe, creates this instability, and it's also going to lead to other service needs like additional mental health services and so forth. So I keep coming back to, where's the plan?
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And gosh, I got so many more questions, but we'll have time since you're now in the race. I'm sure we'll talk again. But you talked about building a campaign team. Let me just talk about politics for a minute. Have you what is like the bumper strip slogan of what your campaign is about? How would you characterize that in just a couple words?
Well, I don't want to do sound bites today, but I know you want sound bites, Jerry. But I would say, it's time for a course correction.
Yeah.
That's what the community is really calling for. And we'll detail that as we get into 2021. I'll certainly be engaging more with you and others and the community as safely as we need to, as we're continuing on with the pandemic for many months.
Campaigning this way is rough. Hopefully
it's really tough, but I tell you, the community wants to be fully engaged, and they want someone to help them give their voice to their needs, and that is part of the course correction that's needed.
All right,
let
me ask you just one more question. So, obviously we have a long history and tradition of women mayors or mayors who happen to be women in Santa Barbara. Who do you identify most with? Marty, Sheila, Harriet, Helene? Harriet Miller, very strong, had a, very aggressive and had a vision. I think Helene, was a great facilitator, consensus builder. Is there any one mayor that you really look up to and admire and would see as a model?
Well, they've all been amazing contributors and all put their own stamp, of course, on the mayoral seat. I would say there are probably characteristics from all of them that I really admire and I hope to bring together, and that I think the community not only values but really needs at this time. The mayoral position is not just one of a meeting facilitator. It's an extraordinary role that stands apart from, but also needs to connect with the council members, with staff, with the community, sets the tone for the whole city. And I think at a time when the city, all of our members of our community need hope and a sense that we can pull through together through and out of COVID, is critical. And I think that has to come from the mayor. And that's why they're asking for a course correction in the mayoralship.
Yeah.
So we can talk more about the other legacies of the other mayors, but I respect many aspects of what they've all brought to the city because they've all been important contributors.
And then just to close on where we started, under the district election system, the mayor is the only public official who is elected citywide. And,
right.
We get these crowded races where someone wins 25% of the vote and they're the mayor and not really representing the whole. So how would you straddle that? How do you talk for the whole city at a time when, we're really divided more into precincts than anything else?
Well, I agree with you, Jerry. And I think we've seen this on a national level. Now is the time for decisive, not divisive campaigning, for leadership. And our campaign is a big tent campaign, which means we're bringing in both volunteers and campaign staffers from all walks of life, including all political backgrounds, because we're here to serve the entire community, not one district, not one special interest, neighborhood. And that's what the mayor does and should do. So the campaign needs to both reflect that and serve that. And that's what we'll be doing.
All right, well, let's leave it there for now. Deborah Schwartz, thank you so much for coming on and for making news. And we'll
Thank you, Jerry.
be talking to you many times as we head into 2021 and the campaign. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I'll look forward to seeing you again soon.